morning and welcome to another very special show of historical fiction, starring today's debut superstar author, Sarah Penner. She wrote, and I just raced out and got my copy, she wrote The Lost Apothecary. And when I went into Chapters to buy my copy, they said they just got a whole new shipment in this morning. So congratulations to you, Sarah. The Lost Apothecary is an instant international bestseller. It's the most exciting story going around. You know what? Sarah's story is the most exciting story right now. To be in number one, and it's an instant international bestseller for a debut novel. Unheard of. Anyway, I will read you her bio, and I will read the synopsis to the book, which I can't wait to dive into, and then she will read to us. Sarah Penner was born and raised in a small log cabin nestled deep in the woods in northeast Kansas. I love that. She graduated from the University of Kansas with a degree in finance and has spent the last decade in various corporate finance functions. She says numbers and spreadsheets appeal to my analytical side, and she loves to travel. She enrolled in her first online creative writing class in 2015, and from that has emerged the show-stopping debut novel, The Lost Apothecary, which was named the most anticipated novel of 2021 by Newsweek, Good Housekeeping, Hello Magazine, Oprah.com, Bustle, Pop Sugar, Betches, Sweet July, and Goodreads. I didn't even know about some of those. That's amazing. Sarah lives in Florida with her best friend, Mark, and their silky hair miniature Dachshund, Zoe. And I'm very thrilled to have you here today. It's very exciting to have you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. That was a lovely introduction. And I'm so glad that Kristen Harmel connected us. And it's funny because, being 3 weeks now after the book has come out, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a dream state, and hearing, the fact that it is an instant New York Times bestseller, an international bestseller, I feel like I'm listening to the accolades of someone far more expert and advanced than me. But I guess this is sort of the beauty of being an author, is you never really know what's going to catch. And The Lost Apothecary it's just struck a chord with a lot of readers. And I'm so thrilled that so many people have loved it so far.
Yeah, it sure has. I hear about it everywhere. I've seen it all over with the social media. All the bloggers and reviewers are raving about it. So I'm very excited to have my copy. I will read the synopsis of the book for everybody. A forgotten history, a secret network of women, a legacy of poison and revenge. Welcome to the Lost Apothecary. Hidden in the depths of 18th-century London, a secret apothecary shop caters to an unusual kind of clientele. Women across the city whisper of a mysterious figure named Nella, who sells well-disguised poisons to use against the oppressive men in their lives. But the apothecary's fate is jeopardized when her newest patron, a precocious 12-year-old, makes a fatal mistake, sparking a string of consequences that echo through the centuries. Meanwhile, in present-day London, aspiring historian Caroline Parcewell spends her 10th wedding anniversary alone, running from her own demons. When she stumbles upon a clue to the unsolved apothecary murders that haunted London 200 years ago, her life collides with the apothecaries in a stunning twist of fate, and not everyone will survive. With crackling suspense, unforgettable characters, and searing insight, The Lost Apothecary is a subversive and intoxicating debut novel of secrets, vengeance, and the remarkable ways women can save each other despite the barrier of time. Oh, that just gives me chills. It'll be very exciting to read. So, without further ado, I will tell everybody to sit back with your cups of tea and hopefully cookies, but be careful of what you put in the tea, because
right, gotta be careful.
Poisons. And I will turn it over to you, Sarah, and to read chapter 1. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you. So chapter 1 is told by Nella. So we begin the book going right into the hidden apothecary shop, and it's about 5 pages long. So I will dive in. Nella, February 3rd, 1791. She would come at daybreak, the woman whose letter I held in my hands, the woman whose name I did not yet know. I knew neither her age nor where she lived. I did not know her rank in society, nor the dark things of which she dreamed when night fell. She could be a victim or a transgressor, a new wife or a vengeful widow, a nursemaid or a courtesan. But despite all that I did not know, I understood this. The woman knew exactly who she wanted dead. I lifted the blush-colored paper, illuminated by the dying flame of a single rush-wick candle. I ran my fingers over the ink of her words, imagining what despair brought the woman to seek out someone like me, not just an apothecary, but a murderer, a master of disguise. Her request was simple and straightforward: for my mistress's husband with his breakfast, daybreak, 4th of February. At once, I drew to mind a middle-aged housemaid called to do the bidding of her mistress. And with an instinct perfected over the last 2 decades, I knew immediately the remedy most suited to this request: a chicken egg laced with nux vomica. The preparation would take mere minutes. The poison was within reach. But for a reason yet unknown to me, something about the letter left me unsettled. It was not the subtle, woodsy odor of the parchment or the way the lower left corner curled forward slightly as though once damp with tears. Instead, the disquiet brewed inside of me, an intuitive understanding that something must be avoided. But what unwritten warning could reside on a single sheet of parchment shrouded beneath pen strokes? None at all, I assured myself. This letter was no omen. My troubling thoughts were merely the result of my fatigue, the hour was late, and the persistent discomfort in my joints. I drew my attention to my calfskin register on the table in front of me. My precious register was a record of life and death, an inventory of the many women who sought potions from here, the darkest of apothecary shops. In the front pages of my register, the ink was soft, written with a lighter hand, void of grief and resistance. These faded, worn entries belonged to my mother. This apothecary shop for women's maladies, situated at 3 Back Alley, was hers long before it was mine. On occasion, I read her entries. 23rd of March, 1767, Mrs. Ranford, Yarrow milfoil, 15 drops, 3 times. And the words evoked memories of her. The way her hair fell against the back of her neck as she ground the yarrow stem with the pestle, or the taut, papery skin of her hand as she plucked seeds from the flower's head. But my mother had not disguised her shop behind a false wall, and she had not slipped her remedies into vessels of dark red wine. She'd had no need to hide. The tinctures that she dispensed were meant only for good, soothing the raw, tender parts of a new mother, or bringing menses upon a barren wife. Thus, she filled her register pages with the most benign of herbal remedies. They would raise no suspicion. On my register pages, I wrote things such as nettle and hyssop and amaranth, yes, but also remedies more sinister: nightshade and hellebore and arsenic. Beneath the ink strokes of my register hid betrayal, anguish, and dark secrets. Secrets about the vigorous young man who suffered an ailing heart on the eve of his wedding, or how it came to pass that a healthy new father fell victim to a sudden fever. My register laid it all bare. These were not weak hearts and fevers at all, but thorn-apple juice and nightshade slipped into wines and pies by cunning women whose names now stained my register. Oh, but if only the register told my own secret, the truth about how this all began. For I had documented every victim in these pages, all but one, Frederick. The sharp, black lines of his name defaced only my sullen heart, my scarred womb. I gently closed the register, for I had no use of it tonight, and returned my attention to the letter. What worried me so? The edge of the parchment continued to catch my eye as though something crawled beneath it. And the longer I remained at my table, the more my belly ached and my fingers trembled. In the distance, beyond the walls of the shop, the bells on a carriage sounded frighteningly similar to the chains on a constable's belt. But I assured myself that the bailiffs would not come tonight, just as they had not come for the last 2 decades. My shop, like my poisons, was too cleverly disguised. No man would find this place. It was buried deep behind a cupboard wall at the base of a twisted alleyway in the darkest depths of London. I drew my eyes to the soot-stained wall that I had not the heart nor the strength to scrub clean. An empty bottle on a shelf caught my reflection. My eyes, once green like my mother's, now held little life within them. My cheeks, too, once flushed with vitality, were sallow and sunken. I had the appearance of a ghost, much older than my 41 years of age. Tenderly, I began to rub the round bone in my left wrist, swollen with heat like a stone left in the fire and forgotten. The discomfort in my joints had crawled through my body for years. It had grown so severe, I lived not a waking hour without pain. Every poison I dispensed brought a new wave of it upon me. Some evenings, my fingers were so distended and stiff, I felt sure the skin would split open and expose what lay underneath. Killing and secret keeping had done this to me. It had begun to rot me from the inside out, and something inside meant to tear me open. At once, the air grew stagnant and smoke began to curl into the low stone ceiling of my hidden room. The candle was nearly spent, and soon the laudanum drops would wrap me in their heavy warmth. Night had long ago fallen, and she would arrive in just a few hours. The woman whose name I would add to my register and whose mystery I would begin to unravel, no matter the unease it brewed inside of me.
Wow, that's great. I'm excited.
That's actually the first time I've done like a reading from my book, believe it or not. I've done dozens of events, and that's the first time I've done a reading. So it's special that it's for you.
Well, thank you very much. I really think it helps give a little bit more insight. I mean, your writing is beautiful, but to hear it in your voice with your tone and knowing everything that you know about the story, I think it really helps. And I think you'll probably be reading, you're going to the idea exchange at Cambridge?
Yes, and tomorrow night. And
yeah.
Yep, and they're going to have me read the first chapter as well. And yeah, I'm excited that will also be available on their Facebook page. It's free and virtual. So I'm excited for that as well.
Yeah, Kaylee Plax is your moderator, and she's wonderful. She's a wonderful lady.
Great.
So, okay, so many questions for you. This is your first novel. You started writing in 2015. Why? What got you going? Because I know I spent my whole life not having any idea I was going to write, and then boom, it happened. So what was the trigger for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because so many authors have said that they have loved writing since childhood and that they were storytelling since childhood. And I wouldn't consider myself a storyteller when I was younger, but I have always loved words, and I've loved composing sentences. And so when I was very young, I had a journal, and I would take it outside and I would kind of describe the backyard, the trees. Then when I got a little bit older and I was in high school, I would dabble with poetry during class. And when I say poetry, I mean just verses of how I was feeling at the time, and just kind of a way to get emotion and, express myself through these lines of poetry. But it really wasn't until my late 20s that I started thinking someday I would love to try an actual novel length work of fiction, which, as you know, is a huge undertaking. And it's not just about your love for languages and love for words. There's a lot of structure and character arcs and plotting that needs to go into an actual novel. But I felt like I was maybe up to the task. And so I kind of simmered on that for a few years. And then you've probably heard of Elizabeth Gilbert. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Mm-hmm.
And she also, about 5 years ago, or maybe 6 years ago, she put out a book called Big Magic. And it's for creatives like us who are dealing with fear, and the fear of rejection and the worry that might stop us from creating. And her whole book, Big Magic, is about that. And she went on tour, and one of the places she went was to Wichita, Kansas, where I was living at the time, smack dab in the middle of the United States. And she asked the audience a rhetorical question to the effect of, what are your dreams? What have you done to pursue them? And if I came back 1 year from now and asked you that same question, would your answer have changed, or would you have taken those first few steps towards your dreams? And it was just the right message at the right time, because, I mentioned I'd been thinking about pursuing writing more seriously. And I had also lost my father, who I was very close with a few months earlier. And it was just the right question at the right time. And I walked out of there feeling very inspired. and decided I'm going to try this. And so within a few weeks, I had enrolled in a creative writing class online and started dabbling in my first novel length project, which was never agented, never published. It's in the desk drawer, never probably to see the light of day again. But the point was, I got started, and I finally decided to set that fear aside and dive into a creative dream. And the rest after that is history.
It's just amazing. And I read the other day that, and who knows who makes up these facts, but I read that only about 3% of people who start out writing books actually get to their first draft. That's pretty alarming. And then something like 95% of authors that apply to agents and to publishers are not accepted. So you have joined a very small little club, and it's amazing to do that in your very first book out. So what was it about this that got you going? The subject is amazing, and I love that in your book you've got like actual poisons, which
yes.
we're not.
Yeah, the book is full of fun things. So there's a map, whether you've got the paperback or the hardcover, there's a beautiful map. There's an ancient apothecary's oath, which I actually pulled from this old French newspaper published hundreds of years ago. There are some recipes for cookies. There are poison recipes at the back. There's just all sorts of fun things in the book. So your question about why this book, I mentioned that I wrote my first book that was never agented, and I got a lot of feedback around why that didn't work. And it was primarily because the characters didn't have a lot of agency in their story. And it was a story about women, but the women were kind of pitted against each other in the story. And I got some feedback from both agents and critique readers who said, these women, you need to empower them, and they need to be able to control their own destinies and be the hero of their own story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really took that to heart. And when I set out to write my second book, which is The Lost Apothecary, I thought, what better way to give women agency and empower them than give them a means to kill or seek vengeance on the people who have hurt them or wronged them. So I set out knowing I wanted empowered women. And then I also, the idea for the apothecary herself just kind of struck me as I was reading about something known as mudlarking, which means scrounging around a riverbed for interesting or historical artifacts. And I was looking through a book and I saw that someone had found a little apothecary jar in the River Thames in London. And I got to thinking, how interesting would that be if that apothecary was a friend and counselor to women in the city and helped them kill the people that had upset them, the men who had wronged them? And so these ideas just started to blend of women's empowerment, an apothecary and a secret hidden shop that supports women. And then that kind of took me down the sinister route of how would she help these women kill the men in their lives? Well, she would do that via poison, and that poison would be very disguised, and she would be a master in disguise, and even her shop is hidden behind a wall. So I think anyone who's written a story kind of knows that it's the whole idea doesn't come to you fully formed. It's little bits and pieces that you learn to weave together as you're outlining or drafting and revising. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I knew I wanted a sinister apothecary and I wanted empowered women. And that's what the story is about.
And the research for that would have been pretty deep, like going back into the 1700s. I love rabbit holes when I get into researching, but where did you have to look for all of your information? That must have been, well, what must have been a thrill though, when you come across some of those little facts and go, oh, that is so usable. I would love to write that in the book. Where did you do all that?
I've always liked Georgian London, which is basically 18th century London. And this book is set in 1791. That's the chapter that I just read. And so I had kind of a basic understanding of what they're eating, what their houses are like, how they're getting from town to town, which is really helpful when you approach historical fiction, because you're not necessarily writing all of those details into the story, but in your own brain, you've got that contextual information. You know that you can't get across the city in 20 minutes. So it's just like helpful from that perspective. So I had this underlying interest in Georgian London. But you're exactly right. When we started going down the route of poisons and apothecaries, and to that end, just medicine in 18th century, that was a lot of research. And so I went multiple different routes. I started with a lot of firsthand accounts, so diaries and journals. I've got a journal in my bookshelf, a man midwife and apothecary. And it's his log, his inventory, kind of a day in the life of here's what I sold to whom and for how much and what they were using it for. So I was able to utilize firsthand resources like that. I also did a lot of research on toxins and poisons, whether plant-based or chemically made. And I tried to look at digitized documents and manuscripts from 200 years ago so that I was not pulling a chemical name out of a contemporary resource, but instead I was looking at how would it have actually been referred to 200 years ago. Maybe its Latin name, or often it was the name of the plant and not the actual toxin chemical within the plant. So, you see the book, it's full of like foxglove and hellebore. All of those have actual chemical names that today a doctor would say this person is suffering from X poison. They're not going to say the foxglove plant, but 200 years ago, it was the plants. And so I tried to stay true to how an apothecary would have actually spoken and referred to her ingredients 200 years ago. So really it was a combination, but I tried to look at as many historical resources as I could.
Just curious, since you have a financial background, that must help you, right? If you're thinking with figures all the time and details, I'm terrible at plotting and at putting all the character arcs. Like I have to just fake it the whole way through. But with your background in finances, that must be pretty intuitive for you, right?
Yeah, so that's funny you say that, because I actually just wrote an essay for my alumni organization about that exact topic, which is how 13 years in finance and data analytics has actually really benefited me in the writing process. And the reason for that is drafting a book and kind of telling that initial story is, in my opinion, very much a right-brained activity. It's very playful, imaginative. Like you just said, you generally don't know where you're going. You just kind of start putting together scenes and seeing what feels right to you. But most of writing is editing and revision, and that is 100% left brain. So that is where you're thinking about restructuring, and you need themes to kind of weave through, and you need to make sure your arcs are logical. And that's not playful, and that's not imaginative. That is like analytics and critical thinking, and that's all in your left brain. And so there were many times over the last 13 years that I felt like my day job in numbers and data was a hindrance, because I felt like it was keeping me from writing and creating and exploring. But I see now, looking back, that it actually benefited me in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of parallels between the revision process and the type of work I was doing at my day job.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Maybe I should get back into doing a little bit of math, figure out some numbers rather than just words. I would love to be that organized. Thank you so much for being here. This is absolutely fascinating. I think that, I don't know about you because you're in the middle of all this craziness, but I think you've got a huge career ahead of you. I mean, it's already, how can you do better than this? It's fantastic. And the subject is fascinating. Your writing sounds beautiful. So I'm very excited about reading it and reading. Are you planning for anything else?
Yeah, definitely. So I absolutely am in the middle, or not at the middle, I'm at the start of another project that, I can't share a lot about, but it does have so many of the elements that readers have loved about The Lost Apothecary. So it has an atmospheric historical setting. It features brave, rebellious women. It's got a lot of cliffhangers, a lot of twists with kind of some thriller elements. And then lastly, it also has a speculative element. So in The Lost Apothecary, that was magic. And The Lost Apothecary very much is within the magical realism subgenre. So there is a different speculative element in this book that I won't reveal now, but it still brings forth those questions about what is real versus what is not real. So I think that readers are going to really enjoy book 2.
That sounds great. I'm not going to ask about timelines because who knows when a book will be done and then goes through the whole process. I know that takes forever. But thank you again for being here and chatting with us.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated with how your mind works and learning about all those things. So I was supposed to be working today, but no, I will be reading your book, hopefully in the sunshine. So
Well,
thank you again. And best of luck with all your upcoming appearances. I know you have a lot of them.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.